So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'll give you a brief introduction, and then I'm aware that we're eating into the time, so we'll get going. Some familiar names in the attendees list. It's great to see some people coming back. Good morning, my name is Natalie. I am the head of consultancy at DPAS. I suppose in a roundabout way, my expertise lie in individual rights. I started off my career with DPAS doing subject access requests. And actually, way back quite early on, I met Nayana, who is joining us today. So, Nayana, if you want to introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Good morning. I'm Nayana George. I'm the Information Rights Services Manager for Reading Borough Council. And yes, I have been doing this work in terms of subject access request work since 2016 for the organisation.
Perfect. So perfectly positioned, I think, to discuss that title that we've got today about dealing with backlogs and SARs in general. So we don't have a super specific agenda like we've had on previous webinars. Those of you that have joined us before know how these things work. So Nayana and I have got a handful of things I think that we'd like to discuss and hopefully will be relevant. And then we will move on to answering some questions. So if anybody has got any questions as we are talking, feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat one if you would prefer. And I will answer, or we will answer where we can as we're going along, but if not, we will pick them up at the end. So let's get going with the reason that we're all here. And I think the key issue, and one of the first things that's really important for us to address, is the backlog. I think it's really easy to talk about dealing with SARs themselves, but Nayana, you're probably as familiar as I am, if not more familiar, working in the public sector. It's something that you see quite frequently. Have you got any sort of words of wisdom?
Yes, it's a real issue. So certainly in the public sector, and I'm sure for most organisations, I would say the key thing to start with is to have a good tracking process in place so that you know what you've got in terms of the request that's coming. And so having that tracking in place, then you're able to monitor the progress that you're making in terms of dealing with them. So that's a key thing for me. And I appreciate that not all organisations, particularly in the public sector, will have case management systems, but even the use of a simple spreadsheet for tracking your requests is really useful to have, so that you know what you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a big believer in having decent privacy management software in place for a variety of compliance things, not just subject access requests. Lots of people will be aware that we are partnered with Responsum, who have a SAR module. Yeah, and like you say, I think often when we work outsourcing redaction services to public sector local authorities, one of the key issues is that it's the management of the requests that's gone a little bit kind of haywire rather than the actual, doing them. If you've got a lot coming in, having a good system in place to keep track of them, I think is really important. And then I suppose, additionally to that, which leads me on to my next slide, one of the key things that we often discuss at DPAS is a massive overarching thing. 9 times out of 10, it's either a capacity or a capability issue that's got, and it happens in the private sector as well. I don't think we should single out public sector here. That puts us in the position that we have these backlogs in the first place. So capacity looks like so many different things. Public sector, again, notoriously under-resourced. It'd be great when it have a team of 10 people. But unfortunately isn't the case. So having the staff available to actually do the work, and I've worked with organisations that don't even have dedicated teams or members of staff. Whoever receives the request is really the person that's having to do them. And then parallel to that is capability. I've equally worked with organisations that are in very fortunate positions where they have large teams and plenty of resources available, but that team doesn't necessarily have access to the correct things. They haven't had the correct training, they don't have the management system like we just mentioned. And it's such a specific area that actually training is something that's really, really important. And Nayana, I suppose it's something that you would agree with, is you've made quite a few times now, have made the investment into making sure that your team is appropriately trained.
Absolutely. Also, it's also, so let me just start with the process. So we talked about tracking and logging and monitoring. It's also really important to have that open dialogue with your customer, be transparent with them, set expectations. So when you've got a request come in, you sort of say to them, you know, we know by law we've got to provide this to you at this time, but this is the situation. And that then you create that dialogue with your customer so that they're kept updated. It's when they don't know what's going on that things can go skew for an organization. And also it's good to, as a team, if you're fortunate enough to have a team, look at the request that you've got, and look at the size of that request. Maybe what are the volumes involved? Is there any cases that you can do quickly, like the quick wins, to try and get that backlog down, and try and deal with those quickly? And that way, you know how much resource, time, and effort you need to put into those bigger cases. Training, yes, absolutely. Resource is I can only speak for the public sector, but this is an area of work that is sort of often quite under-resourced in local authorities, and there is still that sort of not knowing. So you need a process in place where the whole organisation is engaged from start to finish, from the SAR coming in to it processing to its end. And you need to train your organisation to know what a SAR looks like, because it could come in any form of conversation that you're having with a customer, be it a complaint. And often we know people mix up SAR requests with FOI requests as well. So the organisation need to identify that, have a process in place, so that the people who are dealing with it can access that information quickly, because often the teams that are dealing with the requests are not the people that hold the information. So they need to know where to get the information from within the organisation. Training is key, and as you know, we commissioned DPAS pre-pandemic to run the SAR training for us, and that was really useful for our whole service. We're quite lucky in Reading that we've got a team that sort of not wholly and solely dedicated to SAR work, but do manage that SAR piece of work. And we are on top of our data in terms of what's coming in and what's going out. And our staff are trained on how to do those redactions. So those are all key things to getting your backlogs down.
Absolutely, and I think you made a really, really valid point there that's often overlooked, and it's about not just training your IG team or your data protection team, or whichever the name may be. It's so important that we echo that sort of sentiment that SAR can come into anybody in any format. So it's great, and I deliver our SAR training, and I have some fantastic conversations with people on that training. But 99% of the people that are being trained are people in information governance teams, which that maybe that more advanced level and more in-depth look at SARs is appropriate, but often we'll have discussions about can you confidently say that every member of your staff that may receive a request, which realistically could be absolutely anybody, especially administrative staff that have manage inboxes or receptionists or a sort of front of house, can we really say that all of those people could recognize a SAR and know how to escalate it appropriately? And very infrequently can somebody confidently say yes to all of those things. So that annual GDPR training isn't just a checkbox type exercise. There's some real value in it's underpinned by these individual rights. You know, we need to handle them appropriately. And then, as you said as well, that internal process, having it refined, that, you know, it's all well and good having a policy or having it written down somewhere, but it needs to work. People need to know where it is and need to understand it. So the people that are redacting the request probably don't always do the searching for it, like you said. So people understanding how that process works and how we get through that entire life cycle. And it's difficult. You know, it is a pretty niche area, and I know he's in the background. Our founder Nigel will enjoy this. When I started DPAS and was doing subject access requests, I used to ask Nigel questions, and he used to say to me, "Well, it depends." And I used to think, "What do you mean it depends? Like, you know, there must be an answer." And now I spend a lot of my time saying to people, "Well, it depends," because they are such individual requests. They're so different, and it really is that kind of case by case basis. It's really difficult, I think, for that one size fits all. So the training is really important to get people to understand the legislation and the principle.
Yeah.
At the same time, we've just had a question that says, can you recommend any good training tools or training providers? So I suppose we should do that one now. I am obviously going to make a vote for us, for DPAS, provide lots of different training. There is other training providers available. But I would like to say, Nayana, you've had training delivered by us and have come back. So that, I think, sort of speaks for itself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we did the whole day session with yourself and Nigel for my team, and that was great because the team felt so much more comfortable and empowered to just crack on and do the work. And also what's helpful is that after the after training support that you guys give us, you know, the templates and you know, some organizations don't even want to share the slides, but all of that was really useful, and those are tools that we still use when we're sort of interacting with our customers on the process. So yeah, very good, very good. I suppose you know, we at the time we focused on sort of redactions using the tools that we had, but I mean, I know we're going to get onto that a bit later, but there's better tools now on the market.
Yeah, sure. I think things have changed a lot, haven't they? Like you say, that was pre-pandemic. It was probably 4 years ago now, maybe 5.
Yeah.
That we did that training, and at the time, yeah, I think we made the most of what we had available to us, but things have certainly changed. I just want to sort of make a mention that we've heavily focused there on that capability piece, and having people trained is fantastic. However, I'm sure there'll be people that are listening that don't necessarily have the budget or the time. If you have a particularly small team, sometimes having a whole day's training or more is actually really, really difficult. So the capacity building thing is, I suppose, the best case scenario. We'd all love to have the budget to have large teams, so you know there's no crossover and everyone's working on their own requests and we have plenty of cover. We, I suppose, as an organization, can help with that. We offer outsourced redaction services, which is about building capacity externally, and you know there's certainly ways it becomes more cost effective. You're only paying for what you use rather than having to have a full-time member of staff. But I think that my opinion here is potentially that capability is more important. You know, you could have all of the team members in the world. If they're not trained appropriately, then they're not going to be as effective as a handful of people that really can get to the bones of things.
Definitely. And what we have is we have you know, a couple of people who do the actual redactions and get the file completed, but we also have a checking mechanism in place. So we have a overarching manager who checks. So that's key as well, because when you're working on these records, it can be quite, you know, some of it's quite repetitive, but a second pair of eyes is always good to have oversight before you get things out, just so you know, you know, less risk of data breaches when you do that. So whether you're using some sort of manual system, I'm guessing that most people have moved away from the black markers by now. So whatever system you're using to have a second pair of eyes, I think is very important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do the same at DPAS. We have a really stringent quality assurance process, actually. And we're all human, right? That you could be the best SAR officer in the world and know the legislation at the back of your hand. It's really easy sometimes, like you say, they can be quite laborious and quite repetitive. You know, if you're looking for the name Tom, it's quite easy to sort of breeze over it and mistake it for or, you know, and I think that that's normal. We're all human. So rather than you know, berating people for making mistakes, which is going to happen, we just need to put a process in place that minimizes the risk of those. So yeah, having a second pair of eyes. And sometimes it's nice just to have someone to bounce your opinion off of. SARs can be so ambiguous, and it's such a, you know, the legislation is there and isn't particularly black or white. You know, it can be interpreted in a variety of ways. So having someone just as a sounding board sometimes, or just saying, can you look over this and, you know, sort of give me the seal of approval, I think is really beneficial for confidence as well. As well as that formalized sort of process. And that kind of ties into, there's a couple of questions I've had privately here. One of them, so I'm going to go the first one. So some SARs are very complex, involving detailed cases such as adult social care. What's the advice in tackling these really complex SARs that have multiple actors in? And the reason I want to mention that now is one of the key things that we have learned at DPAS is consistency is really, really key. And so the more complex the SAR, going back to that capability thing, of course, we want to have people that understand the legislation and understand the complexities, but having good policies and procedures in place and allowing one person to work on those cases so they can really familiarize themselves with the people that are involved. There's often a bigger picture, isn't there, than just that snippet of a subject access request. So Nayana, I don't know if you have anything further to add where those particular complex SARs are concerned, if there's anything in particular.
I think, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a firm believer that particularly for adult social care and even children's social care cases, quite often the people who are doing the SARs and the redactions are not social work practitioners. They're not the ones that are going to know the case. So if you're in doubt about what you need to redact or how to work through that SAR, once you as an information governance person or an administrator do that redaction work, I would also recommend that you touch base with your social work team and get them to just take a glance at it as well and talk it through with them, as if you have any doubts and uncertainties before you get that over to the customer. That's what we do. So we've got an agreement with our services for any complex cases. They will come in and take a look as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And like you say, they're the people, their expertise are in that area, right? And sometimes you'll be in the position where you speak to social workers that are familiar with the individuals you might be dealing with, and they have a very different insight into the data, you know, that to them it's real rather than the data that or a snippet of data that we might see. So yeah, I think that the use of that capability elsewhere is really important. You know, rely on the resources you've got around you. And I think don't be afraid to ask for help. We've worked with organisations before that have relatively small teams that are under quite a lot of pressure. And because of that, they almost take the burden on themselves, and people fall sort of into this trap of thinking, oh, I need to get it done, I need to get it done. I know from my experience of managing a team of redaction officers, I would rather it take a little bit longer and it be done right than somebody, you know, sort of panic about getting things done and make the wrong decision ultimately. So if it takes an extra couple of days to get through those pages because you need to consult somebody that's going to have a better judgment than you, then by all means do it. I think quality over quantity is something that's really important.
Definitely in this area. I mean, you know, as long as you're keeping your customer updated, that's what I was saying. You've got to have that communication going with your customers so they know what to expect and when to expect that. And then that also brings us back to the original discussion around that whole organizational approach, which is very important in doing this work. So you work together rather than in silo.
Yeah, absolutely. The more people you can get involved, the better. And like you say, that communication with your data subjects, that engage them from the beginning. You know, if they're willing to clarify what it is that they're looking for, then fantastic. Keep them updated. You're much less likely to have somebody complain if they understand the process that you're going through and what they're going to receive. And again, one of the questions that I've had in the background is about managing expectations, and what to do when the requester expects everything. And I think there's two sides to that. We've all seen a template request, haven't we, that says all of my data. On one side, I think people don't understand what all of my data actually means. And the data not documents type argument, they don't necessarily understand what that output's going to look like. And then there's the people that really do expect everything, and then their expectation is of things that actually doesn't qualify, and wouldn't be in scope. It doesn't meet the definition of their personal data. So I think that sort of goes back, Nina, to the point that you made about communication. And actually, the more transparent we are and the better the communication, the better we're managing those expectations.
Yeah, definitely. So from when you get the request, you review it and you open that dialogue with your customer, your data subject, and ensure that they're kept updated as you go along. And also, you know, talk to them. Do they really want all of it, or are they just after a snippet at a period of time? You might get a young person who's or an older person who's a care leaver who's been in care who might want all of it. That's fine, but you say to them, this is what we're dealing with, these are the volumes. Are you happy to have this bit for now, and then we'll get the rest to you later? So most people are reasonable, most people you can come to an understanding with. And that way, you know, should things go a bit skew-whiff and they want to involve the ICO, you've got like a trail of communication with them where you've agreed it. And I believe that the ICO is quite understanding when they know you've got a process in place and you're doing your best to get that record over to that person. Yeah, they might give you a time scale. They might say 2 weeks or within the month, you know, because you've gone over your statutory time scale, but you've got that dialogue going, and that's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, that was perfectly timed for a question that came in the background that was, how do you suggest handling requests where volumes of data and limited staff time means you're unable to meet the deadlines? And that communication, I think, is really the only thing that you can do. There is obviously certain circumstances where we can extend the deadline, but if that isn't the case and we are just going to run over, the only way to manage it is by having good communication. And like you say, if you can get somebody, I've had numerous requests in the past where people have put in a request for all of their data. And actually, once you've spoken to the individual and you've got into a bit more of a conversation with them, they don't want all of their data at all. Like you say, Nina, maybe, especially when it's HR style requests or employees, they probably want a 6-month period, maybe, or they're looking for particular emails or something similar, their HR file. They don't want all of their data, but they actually just don't understand what constitutes their personal data. So yeah, just being transparent, I think, and being able to say this is what you're going to receive. You know, is that what you're looking for, can actually really help you out at the beginning, just to refine. And let's be honest, we've all done, at some point we've had one of those requests that's for all of your data, and it's enormous, especially employee SARs. You know, if retention periods aren't great, you know, we can have years and years of emails, and whether they're personal data or not, somebody has to sift through those documents and make that decision. So ultimately, if we can have that clarification conversation at the beginning and we can, you know, come to a mutual agreement, then it helps both sides out. they don't want to receive 10 years of emails if that, you know, they only want really that particular conversation from that month. And it saves us the, you know. Sorry, Natalie, go on.
Oh no, I was going to absolutely agree with you. That's you know, work out with your customer what it is that they want, and then you can set expectations and timescales around that. If they want all of the data, then again, you know, like I was saying, you can agree with them to hand it over to them in stages. You know, they're not going to read 10 files of 200 pages in one go. So most people are reasonable,
Yeah,
but having that conversation.
a really good point that most people are reasonable. I think there's times where I've spoken to people before and there's a reluctance to have that conversation with the data subject, whereas actually 99% of the time, the data subject is quite willing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Equally, I think it's probably worth mentioning here that if you relentlessly and, you know, frequently cannot meet deadlines, there's probably a different issue at play. And you know, whether that be back to the sort of capacity capability argument, or whether it be that the process needs to change, that, you know, if you're finding a large volume of your SAR requests are not completed by the deadline, then I would probably look at something else being the issue rather than the requests themselves. So yeah, a large area to try and manage, I think. And I've just changed the slide, so I think it was a good time to sort of move on to, we can talk about all of these issues, and we know that there's lots of people that don't have the resources available, don't have the staff, don't have the training, don't have the buy-in from senior leadership, which is a super hard sale, which, you know, so how do we make all those things better? What other things do we need to consider? Just before we move on, I am going to take one of these questions, as it's sort of ties in. How would you tackle issues such as the exec board and senior management not listening when it comes to dealing with SARs or meeting legal deadlines? This is a really difficult question, I think, because without some sort of senior leadership buy-in, it's a really difficult area to be doing well. However, you can only work with what you've got. You know, if you're reporting accurately, maybe quarterly, or to some sort of risk committee, I would relentlessly be flagging the risk of being non-compliant with individual rights requests. Ultimately, it's the organisation, the data controller, that's potentially going to receive the fine if, you know, things go to that extreme. I would just be taking any opportunity to consistently make sure that they're aware of the risk. There isn't an awful lot else I think you can't do if the exec board are so unwilling.
Yeah. I mean, this is where your tracking is important, isn't it? So you can get the data, the management information to present to your seniors, and you know, obviously in local authorities we do have sort of risk management meetings and meetings with councillors and senior officers. So we report every quarter on how far we've got with any backlogs that we might have. And we also do a weekly report to our senior officers to say, look, this is where we are with this. But other than that, raising that awareness and having those conversations with them, with the data to back it up, you're not going to get much out of them. Data is so important. So tracking, logging, monitoring, and reporting is key to getting that backing and support, because the senior managers don't always know what's happening down below and what we're having to deal with operationally. So raising awareness with them, and they listen. You know, when you bring the ICO and what could happen into the conversation as well, when you're you know, then they do start to listen. So absolutely.
A little bit of fear-based pressure isn't always a bad thing, hey? No, I completely agree. I completely agree that reporting, and I suppose it goes back to the accountability idea of the legislation, that demonstrate what you're doing, you know, and have that on hand. The more that you can prove, and like you say, the data itself talks. And I think my experience with any kind of exec board or SLT is they want to see the facts and figures. So if you can demonstrate where we're falling down and what the potential consequences are, then that would usually be enough. But yeah, that's all you can be doing, I think. Which also now leads us on nicely to, we've had a couple of questions now about software. So redaction software, software to support the management of SARs, sort of software should you use to redact information. So lots of software-based questions actually, there's 3 or 4 in the background. As a SAR log, personally, the one that I have favoured now is Responsive, which is very cliche, seeing as they're a partner of ours. However, I just like that it does so much, and that the different modules interact with one another. So for an IG team or a DPO that has oversight, it's a really good one-stop shop to be able to see SAR progress alongside your risk register, your ROPA, your DPIAs. I just like everything's in one place. I'm sure other people will have different opinions. And I've seen people do very well logging SARs on Excel spreadsheets. You know, it does work. Redaction tools. I will be completely honest, I can't say I've seen one that is 100%. It very much depends on the area, I think, that you work in. I've seen some fantastic ones. I mean, eRedact is probably one of the big ones on the market. And it does what it says it's going to do. However, you can't teach a computer to read context. So if you're doing HR SARs, employee SARs, yes, eRedact, Analytics, that one of the many hundreds of redaction tools available, will do the job. It can help you identify email addresses and search for names. It's got advanced search and find functions on. However, if you're dealing with things like health and social care records, then the makeup, the context of a sentence is actually quite likely to be personal data, and a computer won't work that out. So really difficult. I think there is definitely areas that redaction tools help, and they can cut time and they can provide a wealth of resource. But I also think that there is definitely negatives that we need to be aware of, and I would never rely on a redaction tool without some sort of human review. Nina, I don't know if you want to share the use or.
No, I totally agree with that. There is a lot of different software out there, and if you are, looking to purchase, just have a look at what's out there and what fits your organization, and your process. Of course, it's not foolproof, and you do need that second pair of eyes, that human eye that checks it through. But having the software gives you that time to do that check and balance in a more measured and sort of thorough. It gives you that time back. So it's good to start thinking. If you haven't got any software, your organization, it's good to start thinking about heading in that direction. It doesn't necessarily take away the need for resource, because you still need that human eye to check through it. But it's worth having to free up the time to help with your backlogs. But equally, you need a human looking at it, double checking that what you've done is okay. And I think quite a lot of them can tailor the software to your organization's needs. So if you're predominantly working on social care stuff, and obviously it's not just about redacting names and dates of birth, there will be other sensitive information in there, such as, or something has been said, so look at what's right for your organization. But because there are lots of products out there, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like you say, there is so many, and they each have their own kind of novel reason why they're the good one on the market. And yeah, everyone's going to have a different requirement. And I think by all means, Nina, like you say, use it to increase productivity and the efficiency of the resources you have. But yeah, well, just don't rely on it, I think, is a fair way of putting it. A couple of people asked about manual redaction software. So I think Adobe is probably the best known
Yeah.
software. Nitro Pro is another one that we're familiar with at DPAS, and I've spoken to quite a few local authorities that use it. They're very similar, if I'm honest. They're doing the same job. Adobe has the added bonus of, because it is a PDF reader formatter, the additional functionality can be useful sometimes. Nitro Pro is a little bit more black and white redaction software, but obviously the pricing reflects that. So I suppose it depends what you want it to do as to what's going to fit your organisation best.
I think also with,
Go on, Nayana, go for it.
sorry, I was going to say, some of the software that's out there, you know, with Adobe, you're working with the PDFs, but a lot of the software out there now can read any document format. So, you know, so go for something versatile in that way, then you don't have that extra pressure of having to scan and PDF everything.
Yeah, for sure. We actually are kind of still in the kind of research and development stage of using an organisation called Nalytics, and one of the key benefits of using their software is that you can put in a variety of file formats and it will convert them all into a PDF that's a flattened version, which is a great functionality. Talking of format, we've also had a couple of questions about CCTV. How should you handle a request for CCTV data? The black and white answer there, I suppose, is in the same way as any other request. CCTV is personal data. I think we have a hesitation, and people are slightly more standoffish, for want of a better way of putting it, when it comes to dealing with CCTV requests. The law applies in exactly the same way. You know, there is technology to consider, and whether you have the capability to redact CCTV, or whether it would be disproportionate, and you know that's going to be different for each organisation. There is also a question about CCTV redaction tools, and I've seen a couple. Facet, I think, is one of the sort of market leaders, and there's one called Secure Redact. They all work in a pretty similar way. I can't say I've used one or the other enough to have a kind of really solid piece of software to recommend. But yeah, the dealing with CCTV requests, they're still a SAR, is the sort of black and white answer, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. They are a SAR. We don't get many of those, and I'm not really familiar with software in terms of redacting those. We quite often ask for sort of traffic camera footage, you know, where people have been in an accident or what have you. But we make sure that all of our requests are sort of have been overseen by the information governance team, because they're the experts before anything is shared. So just double check.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see it more frequently with CCTV, actually, because more staff will potentially have access to CCTV equipment, that the responsibility for dealing with CCTV requests falls to those operational staff rather than an IGT. Still exactly the same piece of legislation that the request is under, and the same rules apply. So yeah, make sure it's going through your IG team for sure. One of the most frequent approaches to CCTV requests is not to release the footage, but to invite people to come and watch it. You know, it depends on your technology and what's proportionate to your organisation. So that actually leads us nicely onto another question about how we share data. So it specifically says images and SAR requests, but any data. Nayana, do you have an internal policy about how you share
it? Yeah, so we if the requester wants a paper copy, you know, we do facilitate that, and we, you know, make it into a nice binder and what have you. But if that's the case, we invite them in to come and pick it up from us, or we always send it out recorded delivery to make sure that they get it. obviously if we're sending it by email, then we use secure email to send it out, because it's personal data. So a lot of the stuff the council sends out externally is by secure email anyway. Some we do get queries from some customers who has issues with accessing secure email, but you can share through SharePoint as well that way. So, but you just need to agree with your data subject in terms of how they want to best manage it. You know, if you've got an elderly person, for example, who's not IT savvy or don't have access to that, you just need to work out how best to sort of facilitate their need. So yeah, have a conversation, but make sure whatever you use is secure. That's what I'm saying. If you're sending it out hard copies, make sure you use a tracking and a secure delivery method so it doesn't go astray.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's a risk-based kind of approach here that personally I would try and avoid using any kind of external hard drive, so disks, USBs, that kind of thing, unless it's absolutely necessary. Yeah, secure portals, secure email, I think is the go-to, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure, I would go along the lines of, and there's so many of those programs now are accessible, and some have very low fees or are free. I mean, Egress, you can send free emails on, so anyone can access. There's lots of ways of doing it securely without it being a massive either expense or, you know, a massive burden on the IT department having to integrate software. It's not that difficult. Okay, we've got some really interesting questions. I'm also conscious of time, so I'm going to go down to there is a question, Nayana. I will pose it to you and see what your answer is before I put my 2 pence in. But somebody has asked, do you think the legislation around SARs is likely to change in the future to reduce the burden on the data controller?
I personally don't think so, but I've not seen anything to suggest that it would. Me personally, it would be great, but it's relatively new, isn't it? And people are still getting their heads around what they're entitled to. So I can't see it changing at the moment, unless you know something that I don't.
No, I certainly don't. No, I mean, there's lots of skepticism around the DPDI bill that I'm not going to speculate on. We haven't seen a final draft. I don't think that they will dilute individual rights. It would cause absolute chaos, I think. But who knows? I can't see it happening personally, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to. So we will see, I suppose, in the next sort of 12 months what changes. I also think it's really important to not see SARs as a burden on the data controller. As individuals, we are all data subjects and we all have the same rights, and I'm glad that I have the right of access. I do think that there is occasions where it can be weaponized, if you like, and people use it for a nefarious kind of motive, but 99% of requests are genuine requests for data that those individuals are entitled to have. So I think it's important we see it as what they are and not necessarily as a burden. I completely get it. We've all been there and you roll your eyes and you have a massive request to deal with and it's going to take days, but ultimately we are upholding somebody's rights, and I don't think that should be seen as a burden. That is ultimately what the legislation is for.
I agree, absolutely. It's there. We need to work with it because it could be something that we need ourselves, isn't it, at a future date? So absolutely.
Exactly. Okay, we have lots of questions coming in. I wish we had time to take all of them, but we don't. I am going to make a quick mention. Somebody said about adding watermarks to redacted copies. Completely in support of doing it. Not everywhere does, and it doesn't have to be done, but I think it's a really good idea. So when you release a copy of whatever data, especially if it's a hard copy, I would absolutely put a watermark on it. So if it was ever breached, if anything ever happened, you know, it could be an accident, then you can identify who that copy of the data belonged to. And you know, if you've released it to a data subject and then they cause a data breach, you can distinguish that it was their data set, not yours. Yeah, I don't think it's a negative at all. So I think that, okay, there's one last question. Let's take this one and then we can kind of start wrapping up. So Nayana, the question is, in the case of the data subject putting in multiple SAR requests over a period of time, or multiple members of the same family putting in SAR requests, how would you deal with this? So I'll let you go for it first.
Look, it's going to happen, especially if you're, you know, for us as the local authority, we have customers who might have other issues going on, so they're going to want all of their data. You've just got to manage it the same way as anyone else. You can't sort of single it out or refuse to do it or delay it. You know, you've got to work through it in the order that it comes in. And that's where communication and building that rapport with your data subject will be really useful when you are in that situation. But you know, the bottom and hard line is there's no way around it. You've got to deal with the request that's coming in. And if they are different members of the family, okay, sometimes you might be able to say, are you happy for me to share your file because your sister's requested it? It would save us time if we didn't have to redact both of your data from each other's files. You know, are you happy with that approach? And something like that, you've got to get that in writing so that you've got it as a backup for later. But other than that, there's really no way around it. You've got to deal with it and follow your process from start to finish.
Yeah, completely agree. And it goes back to that communication thing, doesn't it? That the better the communication with the data subject, ultimately you can probably help them out, and they're going to reduce the amount of work that you potentially have to put in. The only thing I'm going to add to that is that if you have a data subject that puts in multiple SARs over however long a period of time, there is the potential to be able to refuse requests on the grounds that they're excessive. However, excessive refers to frequency. So it would need to have a reasonable time period elapsed between requests. So you get a request, you know, you're asking for all of my data, which you fulfill, and then somebody a month later asks for all of my data again. It would be reasonable to only provide them with that month of data that wouldn't have been fulfilled in the original request. So I think if you are having repeat requests of the same person, it's something to bear in mind that there's no obligation for you to continually provide the same information. However, different members of the family are different requests. And so, yeah, that communication, I think, is then the really important part again.
That's where your record keeping is important, isn't it? So, you know, we keep a record in line with retention periods of the data that's being provided. So you're quite right. You don't have to give them the whole set again. It will just be from the data whenever you completed the last request to the current date. Yeah, it's the record keeping that's important there. So you know what's been provided, so you're not having to go back through it again. We get requests where someone might come back a year later or 2 years later and say, oh, I've lost my file, can I have it again? So within it's reasonable to expect that somebody might replace it or something might happen, in which case we would share it again, but we wouldn't do it on a sort of like a frequent basis.
Yeah, I agree. And that goes back to that case by case, it depends type argument, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That there is no blanket approach to subject access requests. I think each one has its own nuances that will make you know, swing one way or the other. So yeah, just because, and that equally goes for just because you refused a request last week, doesn't mean if that person puts in a request this week that you can refuse that one. They really are individual cases.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've covered the capacity and capability thing there, and the software stuff to death. And there's so many ways of addressing it that I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer. One of the remaining questions we have is, if we were to get external help, how does this work? I can do you my DPAS sales pitch in response to that. We offer a variety of services, and they all look very different depending on what you need. So we offer services that are sort of end-to-end management. So that outsourced SAR support. So we would have your requests, redact them, send them back to you, ready to go back to a data subject. We provide an assurance type service where you can do your usual process, and we would be that second set of eyes for you if it was particularly complex. The bullet point there that says SAR Light is kind of an advisory role. So it's almost done on a retainer, and you can just come to us for advice on those more complex requests. And then obviously there's more sort of more complex services like data protection manager and DPO outsourced services. So it's really scalable, really flexible. It depends on the sort of support that your organization needs as to how that process works. And I suppose that goes back to, we touched on earlier on that Nayana has had training delivered by DPAS. Sometimes you don't need us to come in and do it for you. You might just need somebody to kind of impart a bit of knowledge onto the team you've got. And these are courses that we have coming up, but we offer, and this is what Nayana's done a couple of times, our more bespoke training. So it's more specific to your organization. And I think as somebody that delivers training, that is certainly what I prefer to do. I think it's more detailed. And Nayana, I think given sort of your history with training with us, that's the approach that you think is more beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. We've just commissioned some training around redactions for our legal team, and that will be very bespoke to us. So we're going to work with your colleagues, Nat, in sort of drafting that and framing that to our needs, and that will be delivered online, like 3 sessions, and we're really looking forward to that. So yes, that is great stuff. The subject access request course was excellent. All of these courses that you put up on your slide are all been absolutely fabulous for us.
Yeah, I think it's nice, isn't it, that like you say, that kind of investment into some bespoke training really hits the nail on the head a little bit more. And sometimes, yes, I'm not, I'm not going to lie that it might work out slightly more expensive to pay for bespoke training rather than an off-the-shelf one. However, you're guaranteed to have every single little niggly question that you want answered. So actually, it's the perfect way to kind of set up your team. And like Nayana said, I think the relationship doesn't end because the training is finished. If you've got some questions, get in touch. We pride ourselves on being that kind of pragmatic and flexible organization, and we don't just cut off when at the end of the contract or such. Reach out and speak to us, which actually leads me nicely onto, I'm very aware I've only got a few minutes. I'm going to have Emma telling me off. Wasn't expecting you to. A perfect way, I suppose, to answer some of those questions and people to see what we do is to come to our conference, which is the end of January in Birmingham. It's completely free. Nayana, you came last year. I'd like to say we had a pretty good day in Bristol last year.
We had a brilliant day. It was great. And your colleagues have already told me to save the date for next year, and we've done that. So we're looking forward to the next conference. Absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely. And hopefully this year it's going to be bigger for sure, and fingers crossed better than last year. So if anybody's interested, I'm aware that I just talked over the information that you probably wanted. But if anybody is interested, then feel free to reach out and we can point you in the right direction to sign up. But if not, if you go to our website, which is there, then you'll be able to find all of the information about the conference there, and you can sign up. And the ICO actually only confirmed really recently, but we've got the ICO doing the keynote speech as well. So
okay. Can I just 2 things if I've got time now? just want to say, if whoever's on the call, if you've got a backlog and you've got cases that have gone, the requests that have come in some time ago, it's worth you reaching out to your customer and saying, look, we've got this request, we know you're waiting on it, do you still need it? Because sometimes they come back and their circumstances have changed and they actually say no, and then you can close that case off. And we've done that quite a bit. The other thing is, you know, we talk about the training and the costs, but when you sort of look at that against what could happen should you have a data breach because you're not doing something properly and you haven't been trained, the risks are higher, isn't it? So it's worth investing in training to sort of cover those risks off. So that's sort of like my summary, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have 1 or 2 minutes to go. So if there's any last minute questions, the time to put them in is now. There is one last question, so let's see if we can wrap it up in 2 minutes. My organisation received a lot of requests in 1 month, but then hardly any in subsequent months. Does the ICO take this into account if you can't reply in time? I don't have a specific answer because, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but in these circumstances, I don't work for the ICO. There would certainly be, if you demonstrate your compliance and your commitment to doing things right, then the ICO aren't necessarily the big bad wolf. They aren't exactly renowned for handing out fines left, right, and centre. So don't be scared of the ICO. You know, open up that communication with them. And yes, I think the answer is that they would understand your sort of your position.
Yeah, my experience is the same. They are understanding. They don't, you know, as long as you've got a process in place and you know what you're doing and you're working towards that, they are supportive of that. They're not saying you've got to do this or we'll fine you. That's not their approach. That's not what I've found anyway.
I agree. Don't be wary of them. You know, they're there to support as well. So, you know, you reach out and use them as a resource. That they're pretty understanding. Okay, so we're bang on an hour, so I am going to wrap up. Thank you everybody for joining us, and a great amount of questions. So I think we got through most of them. If we didn't answer them, I'm really sorry, but feel free to reach out. All of the details, DPAS, are on the screen. You will get like a follow-up email with a survey and stuff. So for those of you that have got time could fill it out, it's really appreciated. And yeah, hopefully you found it useful and you know how to get in touch with us. Connect with Nayana on LinkedIn. I'm sure she won't mind if you pick her brain a little bit. But have a lovely rest of the day and weekend.
Thank you.